end of this session, and what a contrast with the beginning, Mr. Speaker. Back in July 2024, those benches were full of sycophantic questions from adoring new MPs. Yesterday, the Prime Minister was reduced to begging those same MPs to save his own skin. The economy, the only thing that's grown is the welfare bill. The only thing that's grown is the welfare bill. So can the Prime Minister tell us, how many more people are out of work and claiming universal credit since he took office?
Have the youth guarantee that we put in place for young people. We've raised the national minimum wage thanks to our Chancellor. We've helped young people into work by cutting NHS waiting lists thanks to the work of the Health Secretary. We put more police on the streets thanks to the work of the Home Secretary. And we've cut energy bills for young people thanks to the work of the Energy. I am very proud of what this Labour government has delivered in the first session of this Parliament.
Say how many people...
What's your take on this debate? Drop your opinion in the comments below, and let's see where the real public stands on this issue.
Many more people, in fact, are out of work and claiming universal credit since he took office. Perhaps he doesn't know. So let me tell him. The number is 1.5 million people. That is the entire population of Leeds, Cardiff and Edinburgh put together. The Prime Minister tell us why, on his watch, for the first time ever, we are now spending more on welfare than we earn in income.
And, Mr. Speaker, we are reforming it to improve it. And what did they do when we put that forward? They voted to keep the same broken welfare.
Sacking Ollie Robbins. Perhaps he'd like to apologise for that. Why we're spending more on welfare than we're earning in tax? It's because of him and his terrible policies. This is all under him. We are spending so much on welfare, we cannot afford to defend the country. And if he won't listen to me, Mr. Speaker, perhaps he'll listen to the former Labour Defence Secretary, Lord Robertson, who is saying, and I quote, "We cannot defend Britain with an ever-expanding welfare budget." I agree with Lord Robertson. Why doesn't...
The highest sustained spend since the Cold War. What did they do, Mr. Speaker? When they came into power, defence spending was 2.5%, and when they left power, it was 2.3%.
Not the same as giving more money for defence. He has been...
What you just saw in that exchange wasn't a normal PMQs session. It wasn't routine political debate. It was a pressure test on Keir Starmer's entire economic narrative. And from the very first question, the tone was already set against him. The opposition didn't come in asking for explanations. They came in asking for accountability, and they anchored everything to a single number that Starmer could not escape. 1.5 million more people now claiming universal credit. That figure became the center of the entire confrontation, because once it was placed on the table, every policy explanation Starmer tried to give immediately looked like deflection rather than response. He attempted to build a defensive wall of achievements, youth programs, minimum wage increases, NHS waiting list reductions, policing expansions, energy relief measures, but none of it actually touched the question he was being asked. The question wasn't, "What have you done?" The question was, why is unemployment and welfare dependency rising under your leadership? And that gap is where the pressure started to build. Instead of directly addressing the unemployment figure, Starmer shifted into what looked like a prepared list of government accomplishments. But in the context of the exchange, it didn't land as confidence, it landed as avoidance. Every policy mention became a reminder that the core issue was still untouched. The opposition immediately recognized that and doubled down. They didn't move away from the number. They repeated it, reframed it, and escalated it, tying it directly to taxation pressure, welfare expansion, and national economic strain. And at that point, the argument stopped being about employment statistics and started becoming about whether the entire economic model of the government is sustainable. Because if more people are entering welfare than leaving it, then every other economic claim becomes harder to defend. Starmer's response shifted again into political defense mode. He blamed inherited systems, previous policy failures, and structural problems left behind by the opposition. But that created a deeper problem because it positioned him in a cycle where, after nearly 2 years in power, he is still relying on past governments as the explanation for present outcomes. And that is exactly what the opposition exploited. They turned it into a continuity argument. If everything is still the previous government's fault, then what exactly has changed under this government? From there, the debate escalated into fiscal pressure. Welfare spending versus income tax revenue became the next battleground. The argument was framed in a way that connects household economics to national stability, suggesting that rising welfare costs are now directly competing with defense capacity and borrowing limits. That's when the tone shifted from political disagreement to structural concern. Because now it wasn't just about unemployment, it was about whether the state can afford its own obligations. And that's where borrowing figures were introduced. Rising debt costs, increasing interest pressure, and long-term fiscal strain were all brought into the same frame. The implication was simple. If borrowing is at a 2-decade high and welfare spending is expanding at the same time, then something in the system is becoming unbalanced. Starmer attempted to redirect again into policy achievements and broader economic progress, but the exchange had already moved past isolated policy points. It had become a narrative about control, or lack of it. Then came the political layer, because once economic arguments reached their peak, the focus shifted inward, toward instability within the government itself. Mentions of reshuffles, internal dissatisfaction, and MPs questioning leadership turned the debate from policy scrutiny into political vulnerability. At that stage, the exchange was no longer just opposition versus prime minister. It was becoming a picture of a government under internal strain while also facing external pressure. And that's why the tone of the final part of the confrontation changes completely. It moves away from numbers and policies and into political survival. It suggests a leadership that is not just being challenged from across the aisle, but also being quietly questioned within its own ranks. By the end of the session, the opposition had built a narrative that wasn't based on one argument. It was built on accumulation, unemployment rising, welfare spending increasing, borrowing costs climbing, defense concerns growing, internal political pressure building. Each point alone could be defended, but together they form a single message. A government struggling to maintain control over its own economic story. And that is why the final impression of the exchange is not just criticism, it is pressure. Constant, layered, and escalating pressure on a prime minister who is trying to defend multiple fronts at once, while the opposition focuses on only one goal, breaking the narrative of control.